Put your best face forward with Caldera Lab, the leader in men's skincare. Use our exclusive code Gators at calderalab.com to enjoy 20% off their best products. Support for Gators Breakdown is also brought to you by Manscaped. Don't take a chance while trimming below the waist. Take 20% off and get worldwide free shipping with the code Gators20 at manscaped.com.
Gators Breakdown, because there's never a dull moment in Gator Nation.
The Gators Breakdown podcast is ready to go. I am your host, David Waters. You can find me on Twitter, X. I'm still kind of figuring that out. But there, you know where to follow, at GatorDave_SEC. Hey, look, everybody, I found him. I dug him up somewhere. Here's my co-host, Will Miles. You can find him on Twitter at Will Miles, SECreadreaction.com. Well, it's been a little bit, some busy summers. We're back together. Fall camp has started, and my friend, I guess here we are. 5 straight months of pure football talk, pure football.
Yeah, man, good news is I'm done getting yelled at by parents for the baseball season, and now I transition into getting yelled at by Gator fans for what I take an unpopular opinion. But best time of year.
What's worse, Will? What's worse?
Oh, I'd much rather get yelled at on X or Twitter or whatever it's called by Gator fans than by the parents. The parents, the sports would be great if it wasn't for the parents. But it's a good time, and this is a good time too, right? Like the reality is it's fun talking about Florida. It's fun to have a season here, and we've been talking all off season about what we're going to see. And we got, 4 weeks left to talk about what we're going to see. And then eventually we're going to be talking about what we've seen. And it's the most exciting time of the year, man. It's like our Christmas. Like the first game of the year is Christmas. And this year it's a good game, right? Last year it was too. We're not playing the Citadel to open things up or some Eastern Washington, or we're not playing Georgia's schedule. We're playing, Utah to kick things off. So it's exciting to get things going.
Yeah, like fall camp starts yesterday, today. Players reported yesterday on Sunday. We get the first practice today on this Monday. As Will said, this is like Christmas Eve. Now the anticipation's here. You get that one little gift sometimes, on Christmas Eve to kind of set you up for Christmas Day. That's kind of where we're at right here with fall camp. Getting here, coming around, and we're all ready for it. It's been a while since we got together live, so everybody in the YouTube chat, thank you for joining us live right here. And well, I had to get the new polo. I see some mentions there. The new polo out. Hey, there's a Lincoln Fanatics down in the description. You can find it there. That supports Gators Breakdown as well. And Sean Abel says back in black. So yeah, I didn't think about another AC/DC reference there, but Thunderstruck and back in black now. So there we go. But all the new stuff, all the new stuff that comes with the season. You get all the new merch and stuff too. So that's always fun.
You got to be prepared to match Napier. Now you're wearing the same threads that he's going to be wearing all year long, and nothing like wearing black the first 4 weeks of the season there when you're down there for the tailgate, buddy. Like that's the right color to be in because it's not hot down there at all for those first couple of games. Thankfully they're night games, but the tailgate it ain't the night, man. So you're gonna have to watch out.
Yeah, you're right. There's night games and all the black there. So he can wear it. And then was the Arkansas game, we should be getting those black jerseys. So I'm sure that was one big stress there from the Gators merch department. Hey, we know we're wearing black this year. So get that black merchandise out there early on. So, all right, everybody, hit that like button, subscribe button if you haven't done so yet. Smash that like button. It really helps us out right here on Gators Breakdown and on Gators Breakdown Plus. Hey, you get those ad-free episodes. Hey, as the season rolls around, as you heard at the beginning of this episode last week, too, more ads coming in. If you want those ad-free episodes, look, you support me. You'll hear those ads and stuff. We got to do that to kind of keep the lights on right here on Gators Breakdown. But hey, to keep it going, if you want those ad-free episodes, you can join Gators Breakdown Plus. You get that Discord as well. And then, of course, I think we got to announce this just in case you missed it. But the Gators are going to have an open practice this Saturday. So you can go check out the team for yourself in the swamp on Saturday, but also right after the open practice, Florida Victorious 2023 Fan Day. So you have to be a Florida Victorious member. You can get on the field access after the on-field practice. The open practice is from 2:30 to 4:30. Then you get to get on the field at 4:30 to 5:15 if you're a Florida Victorious member. So if you haven't done so yet, join there as well. You can save 20% on your first month using promo code GatorsBD right there for Florida Victorious. Promo code GatorsBD gets you on the field after this open practice right there on Saturday. So, Will, pretty neat. We've been wondering when we would get that kind of feel and get around the team a little bit more. I can understand not doing it in year one. You know, you're trying to install so much. You're kind of tunnel vision on getting everything the way Napier wants it. But, hey, give us some good feelings. Get around the team this Saturday.
Yeah, I mean, look, if I lived anywhere near there, that would certainly be something I'd take my kid to. I think that's the thing, right? Is if you're trying to build a community, you're trying to build a culture, one of the things that you do is you do outreach. And so this is part of the outreach, and this is part of making sure that the people who are supporting the program are appreciated. And so hopefully that allows people who are given to Florida Victorious to feel appreciated, because obviously, given the 2024 class and where it sits, NIL is certainly playing a big role in what's going on, and having that in a more streamlined fashion seems to be paying dividends for Florida. So we'll see. Obviously, have to close off that class. 2025 is a big class coming up too. Hopefully we see some guys pop there pretty soon too. But look, I think everything is navigating in the northern direction, so it'll be a cool time to have everybody get together, see some of these players who've been working, right? These guys, like, we're getting excited because the season is coming up. These guys are probably getting relieved that the season's coming up. The fun starts to come for those guys, as opposed to sort of the dog days of summer when you got to put in the work and you don't see any appreciation.
Yeah, absolutely. So, all right, here we go. Fall camp underway right here. You do have that open practice on Saturday, but practice for the first time, helmets only today. But yesterday we got to hear from Billy Napier, Austin Armstrong, Rob Sale, a couple players as well. But I'll concentrate on the coaches. We'll hear from those players coming up multiple times this season. It was Jaden Hill and Montreal Johnson. We'll get to hear from those guys coming up this season, but I don't know how many more times we'll get assistant coaches. So I'm gonna go crazy Austin Armstrong here and Rob Sell a little bit as well. We'll hear from Billy Napier a bit, but on the heels of SEC Media Days, we got to hear a good bit from him as well. So we'll kind of just concentrate it mostly on Austin Armstrong this episode, because he had a lot to say, and we know the focus on defense, and plus just some really good talking points. I think we'll take away from there. So Napier, Armstrong, Sale right here on this episode of Gators Breakdown, and you know what? We'll get it started with the head man himself, Billy Napier, and of course you kind of saw the title of this episode. Looking forward to this team and changes from year one to year two. And of course, leadership and accountability, that's tops.
I think there's a renewed accountability with this group of players. I think they would tell you that. I think we saw really good leadership. We really, from a team perspective, I think leadership, we're asking them 4 questions coming out of this summer, right? Amongst the team, who do you view as a great example and a guy that really did a good job throughout the summer in your position group? Within your class, I think we're looking for lots of cross-section in terms of giving the player a voice. We have a lot of players in different places relative to how long they've been here. And then one of the things we did this summer, as you guys know, is we have accountability teams. We have 2 leaders for each team. And then we asked the players, hey, which person on your team that wasn't a leader did the best job, right? So I think that's one of the things I've been most pleased with, is we have a number of leaders emerging that maybe weren't in that place when we started in January, if that makes sense. So, I think there's a different level of connection with this group. The team chemistry, the morale, the energy in the building is really fun to be a part of. It's a critical time of the year. You got to work really hard, but you've got to work smart. I think we're kind of the theme here for training camp, all parts of the organization and the team, is we have to agree to an expectation. And I think that's a big deal, right? I think if we can agree to what's expected of each other, we can go into this training camp with the right attitude and the right approach. And we can say, hey, you know what? I'm up for that challenge. I'm going to put my ego aside. I'm going to put my emotions aside. And I'm going to coach me, tell me the truth. We can establish trust. We can establish respect. And I'm talking about relative to core values. I think there's a football piece of this, but more importantly, how about your integrity, your role on the team, what type of teammate you are, your discipline, your effort, your toughness, both physically but mentally, emotionally. And then do you bring confidence to the team? Do you spark belief amongst the team because of how hard you work, the attitude and approach that you take? I think I ran across a question the other day that I think is important this time of year. What is integrity? We talk about it being a core value. And I would say you almost have to ask yourself, am I doing the things that I expect of others? Right? And I think if all parts of our team and organization take that approach for the next 21 days, we got a chance to have a good football team.
There we go, Will. Head coach Billy Napier speaking to the media, and it sounds like he's putting a whole lot on these players and trusting his players and to, identify leadership. This needs to be a player-led team. I think, some of the best teams out there, they're player-led. Now, of course, the coach is always going to be in that role, but the best teams are player-led teams, and that doesn't happen without accountability, of course, and what he's bringing up and all these questions and talking to each and every player and who's the leaders and who can become a leader and maybe some guys that surprised you. I mean, it really sounds like he's putting a lot on these players in producing and identifying leaders. And look, he even mentioned egos, and that was probably into last year to a degree, with the things we saw during the season. You had some dismissals during the season, then all the transfers after the season as well. Look, not everybody that transferred had an ego problem. Some guys just aren't fits, but I do think that was probably some of it as well. And one more part to kind of extending, agree to the expectation. I don't know if we'll get that expectation, Will, as far as win-loss record or anything like that. But, agree to the expectation. I'd love to know what the expectation of Billy Napier and these players are, and that's probably, as I said, not really talking about record. It's the expectation to go out there and playing hard, going out there and doing your job. And I think if you do those things, okay, the wins will come. That's probably the easy way out of this right now. We're kind of over analyzing what these guys have to say, but it is talking season, and we're going to get that. We're going to get that feeling right here. But I get the sense he is putting him in year two. He doesn't have to figure as much out, but he's putting a lot of faith in his players to figure out leadership, accountability, and who are going to be these leaders on the team.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, this isn't Napier's first rodeo. He did the same thing at Louisiana, and I'm sure that he made some mistakes there, and he's corrected some of those, or at least he's looked into how can he do things differently and thought about that. But this is a building on the foundation that he set at Louisiana. Went 7-7 his first year at Louisiana. Scored actually less points than they gave up, so probably should have been a little bit worse than they were. Then the next year comes back 11-3. The offense took a step forward, and the defense took a step forward too. Defense took a major step forward, and a lot of that does come. I mean, you think about the games last year where Florida just couldn't get stops. It wasn't a matter of like 6 guys not doing their job. In fact, normally you looked and everybody did their job but one guy, right? Florida goes down, takes the lead. Anthony Richardson makes a great play, makes a pass to Keon Zipper, who breaks a bunch of tackles. 2 plays later, Tennessee's in the red zone, ready to go because they have a busted coverage on the back end. So just making the opposition make plays to beat you will make this team better. Obviously, there are questions at quarterback. There are questions about the schedule and the talent of the teams that they're going to play. All those things we've been talking about all offseason. But just in terms of like expectations, like you were saying, I mean, do your job was an expectation last year that couldn't be met, or at least was not met for a large portion of the season. And it wasn't the same guy every play. But you think about Jordan Travis breaking contain on a bunch of those runs that were just backbreakers in the game against Florida State. They stopped 2 of those, and Florida wins that game, and maybe even wins it pretty easily. You think about the game against Tennessee, the third down and 10, where Cox breaks through the line of scrimmage, and Hendon Hooker is able to sidestep him and make that throw. And 3 plays later or 4 plays later, they're going in for a touchdown, and then score a touchdown at the end of the half, score a touchdown at the beginning of the half, and all of a sudden Florida's behind the 8 ball. All that stuff we've talked about all offseason about the last 4 minutes of the first half, the first 4 minutes of the second half, and just executing better and making sure that you're not, you might throw an intercept or you might throw an incompletion, but the incompletion doesn't kill you because it left 2 minutes and 50 seconds on the clock for the opposition, right? It's, hey, we need to throw a screen pass on 1st and 10. Maybe it's not going to gain 17 yards here on this drive, but it's at least going to bleed 45 seconds off the clock. So all those little things that you start to put together, and you think about it, early last year, Napier went for it like a wild man on 4th down
Yeah.
very early on, and that tempered as the season went on. And I do wonder whether it tempered along with his trust of the different players to actually execute what they were asking to do. And so if that's the case, maybe he has more trust this year, even if the players aren't necessarily as talented. So, or as talented at maybe the key positions. I think obviously quarterback is the place where we sort of look at and say from a Richardson perspective, it's going to be hard to have somebody who's as talented as that position. But look, I mean, no football team wins without having guys bought in. I mean, whenever you hear a team that wins the championship, one of the things they talk about is how everybody bought in and how nobody cared who got the credit and all that sort of stuff. And I think we scoff at that because in many ways you see the talent that comes into Alabama and Georgia and Ohio State and say, well, the talent makes a difference. But look, there's a reason why those teams win some years and why they don't win some years. And it's not just a talent thing. It's you got to get the chemistry right. You got to have the right attitude, culture, all that stuff. And after you win one championship, well, now it's really hard to maintain that sort of stuff. We've seen it with the speeding tickets at Georgia this year, that just the attitude changes as you start to win. Now, is that going to drag Georgia back? I have no idea. But from the standpoint of just culture, like you have to build a culture that can sustain the type of success that you want to do. And I think that's what Napier's really talking about. So, and that way, when you bring in the guys who are really talented, they have a culture to step into that's already healthy and sort of ready, a championship culture to match the championship level talent that you bring in.
He kind of brought it up too, kind of building a level of trust too between the players and the coaches. And I think for players on the field, that's probably a big thing too, because I do think there were times last year, especially maybe on the defensive backfield, there was not a whole lot of trust, and maybe some guys having to, make up for somebody else, not doing their job. And you know what? We probably saw it up front too, a good bit, and how depth was an issue for this team up front last year, and maybe guys thinking they had to make a hero play or have to make the play and not necessarily doing their job. And I think there needs to be trust of guys around them too, that, hey, we've built this in spring practice. We built this in 5 weeks in fall camp, and now we're ready to turn the page. And now I trust these guys around me. I don't have to go try and do their job. I don't feel like I have to go out there and make every play. I can now go out there and trust my teammates as well. And I think that's where a lot of this experience will come into play, Will, of year 2 of Billy Napier, the experience of the transfers that you brought in as well through the quarterback position and on the defensive front, and Moten on the back end and all that stuff. You brought in a ton of snaps on the defensive side. And I think that's going to go a long way in trust as well. Just, being year 2 and the experience of the transfers brought in, and also with the coaches. Now you have a single voice on the back end with Corey Raymond coaching this defensive backfield. And now I think you have one guy to trust instead of maybe you heard something different from Patrick Toney, and despite what you maybe heard from Corey Raymond, or maybe it just didn't line up or whatever. Now there's one single voice back there. Those guys maybe trust what's going on back there from one single voice instead of kind of 2 different roles back there. So I do think, just a natural progression of year 1 to year 2 and some of the experience they brought in to go along with the coaches. I think your trust is going to be a better factor this year as well.
Yeah, I mean, look, everybody will talk about trust if Florida plays really, really well.
Yeah.
And if the defense takes a step forward, and everybody will talk about how you need more talent if they struggle. I think that's the thing, is that you try your best to build these things, and you try to build a healthy culture, and you try to make sure everybody trusts each other. But the reality is you don't know until somebody busts a coverage whether that stuff has stuck. Right. And the finger pointing and the celebrating after a tackle, after a 12-yard gain last year, and all that sort of stuff, I think was indicative of a culture that needed some revamping. And I think, it's not just this past year that there were a bunch of transfers who left. It's also 2 years ago, a bunch of transfers who left. There's been an enormous amount of turnover, and they are relying on a lot of young players. Now, the downside to that is that you don't have a whole lot of experience. But the upside to it is you've got guys who don't have a lot of experience with the previous culture. And so, I don't think anybody doubted that the culture needed an infusion of energy and needed an infusion of accountability when Billy Napier took over. The question is, and this is always the question, right? Is how far can culture take you, and how far can do your job take you when you're playing in the SEC? And there's only so far it can take you. But again, I mean, you look at the games that Florida lost last year against Vanderbilt, games that were really close against Missouri. You know, you have the wins against A&M and South Carolina, and then start laying eggs in the games right after that. A lot of the games were you just needed one stop and you couldn't get it. Even the Dexter penalty on the interception against LSU, obviously he's going full tilt, but that's one of those things where you can't land on the quarterback that way. And, you know, those game-changing plays that just never seem to go Florida's way because in many ways, I'm sure, just remnants of the disciplinary issues that they had previously on the field. So if those remnants are gone, great. I think there's a lot of promise when you look at Napier's record, because it's not like he had an entire roster overhaul at Louisiana, but they go from giving up 479 points in 2018 to 276 in 2019. And they gave up 375 last year. If they go to 276 this year, they're going to be right in that 8-4 range. There is they don't have to take major steps forward on both sides of the ball. They just need to take either baby steps on each or major steps in one. I think, you know, we're going to hear from Austin Armstrong, obviously, but the change in defensive coordinator suggests that they knew that as well. And then again, I think especially when you think about the defense last year, culture and trust are things that, absolutely had to be addressed. Sounds like they're doing that, and we'll see how far it takes them.
There you go. You just brought the man up himself, Austin Armstrong, defensive coordinator. We'll get into what he had to say right here as well. But, Will, he ended his opening statement, you know, toward the end of it, quote, "We're going to be the aggressor and we're going to hunt." Well, I put that on social media yesterday, not expecting the backlash from Georgia fans that I got. Oh, he's just copying Kirby, blah, 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 blah. I was just, shut up. I mean, it's not like he went out there and specifically said something about Georgia, called Georgia out, called Kirby. I mean, has Kirby said something about being aggressive and being, you know, going out there and going to hunt? Sure. I'm sure 50,000 other defensive coordinators have also said that before Kirby Smart. So it's not some special thing for him. But it kind of perturbed me a little bit. But
go play a real schedule and then we'll listen to you.
My thing is, they're worried about that, kind of insecure about some off-the-wall comment after they've back-to-back titles and, you know, winning national championships. I don't get it. I mean, that's their prerogative, I guess, because, you know, when you win that much, I guess you got to find things to get mad about. I don't know. Maybe that's what it is.
I don't know. Were we taking shots at Georgia like hard? Like, were we really that into Georgia that much when we were winning championships all the time?
Oh,
but were you taking offense to the stuff that Mark Richt was saying?
Oh,
or
no.
were you?
No.
I mean, no. You know, it's like if you're gonna make fun of something, like if you're gonna, like, this is the time when you should like make fun of the opposition, not when you should get mad at the stuff the opposition's saying. Anyway.
Yeah,
go play a real schedule and we'll listen to him.
It's just weird to me. But anyway, we'll get into his he was asked what we'll go to first. You know, the last couple of years have been pretty rough defensively and fans are looking for improvement. Big picture, what is it about this team that will be better? Why should people be optimistic about this defense?
We can't control anything that happened before we got here, but our players and our staff has worked relentlessly to make the Gator defense what it's supposed to be. You know, we kind of joke around a little bit. I was talking to recruits yesterday. You know, we were known for the fun and gun around here, you know, but a lot of success, you know, during that time was because of hitting and running. You know what I mean? And we've got to bring that back. You know, we've got to get the mindset back of, you know, we're the University of Florida and there's a standard to uphold here. And a lot of players have come here and laid a foundation with their execution, not their lip service. And we've got to do the work that's required to be able to do that and to put a product out here that we all can be proud of. And, you know, that starts with, you know, knowing what to do, your training, your execution. And we're certainly working every day to do that.
Not just a fun and gun to hit and run, Will. I mean, I love that. But, yeah, I mean, he's got a point there. You know, it's even dating back to – I mean, you can go back to the 80s where you could probably count mostly on a good Florida defense throughout the 90s, throughout the 2000s, besides 2007. But, you know, everybody knows what was on that 2006 defense and that senior-leaded, experienced defense. You got some new faces in 07, but they bounce right back in 08. And Florida goes on a run where, I mean, you could always count on defense in Florida. until about 2020. 18, 19, yeah, it may not have been as good as you wanted it to be under Todd Grantham, but it was huge improvement from before. And what was better, then it just completely falls off a cliff in 2020 unexpectedly. And we're sitting here pointing at 2019 is looking at a defense where, hey, they just got to get better in the big games. Well, they just got worse in every game. So it was complete opposite when you want to look at it there. But he mentioned mindset, Will, and I do wonder, what do years of bad defense does to the psyche of the players? We heard good things a year ago as well about how all this was different from Todd Grantham. And heck, you and I thought it was just easy enough getting him off the sideline and plugging somebody else in, and you're going to improve right away. But it didn't happen that way. So, we heard how it was different from the previous staff, and there we were seeing the same results. And I think some of that can be, the mindset of just having to dig out from putrid defense from the last few years. And I think this is where it can be beneficial to have so many young faces under Billy Napier, first year, second year players, new faces from the transfer portal. The buy-in should be there. The experience should be there. There shouldn't be many bad habits left from a defense held over from the last staff. As I mentioned, Corey Raymond's kind of the single voice on the back end. Every coach is back except for your defensive coordinator, but everybody thinks, hey, this is the same defense, but maybe being led by somebody better right here at Austin Armstrong. So, but I do wonder when the psyche. I think they got to be tired of all the questions on that side of the ball, and if they're ever going to turning around and maybe living up to an expectation. We know the talent level is better on that side of the ball, but as he said, it can't just be lip service. It's time to turn it around.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the first thing you look at, we can talk about attitude and we can talk about all that stuff, but the first thing you got to look at is the defensive line. And you just look at who were contributors on the defensive line. It was Javon Dexter, Desmond Watson, a little bit of Chris McClellan, and nobody else. And three guys in the interior section of the defensive line in the SEC, you're going to get mauled in the second half is what is the reality of things. So they've shored that up. When you talk about Cam Jackson and Caleb Banks coming in as transfers, and then you've got Jamari Lyons and Will Norman as either freshmen or redshirt freshmen. They're backing those guys up on the defensive line. Jalen Humphreys, we'll see if he can contribute something. But now you're talking about, and I think, Armstrong will talk about this in one of the clips coming up, that they've got bodies at this point to rotate in, and they're starting to talk about who do I cut from those positions versus, or not cut, but who do I limit playing time for those positions versus how do I get more than two guys out there. And, that's the reality, is that Florida's just been short on bodies up front now for 3 straight years. It was covered up a little bit by some of the smoke and mirrors at the defensive end. Specifically, you talk about Zuniga and Polite, and then, and then Grenard there the year after. I think they were able to cover up some of the defensive line issues that they had. They were able to break in, Adam Schuler there as a transfer was able to really fill a spot, but then they missed on a couple of transfers, and all of a sudden there's nobody there. And that's the reality, is they've just been dealing with a defensive line that has nobody in there who's been a game changer. So, hopefully Jackson or Banks, one of those guys can be a game changer, but if nothing else, they're going to allow them to have a big rotation there. And look, everything looks better when you're not getting 6 yards a pop on a run. And everything looks better when the pocket starts to collapse, and it's collapsing from the inside, which means the defensive ends are able to get home as opposed to allowing a quarterback to get up the outside. So, look, I think we can talk about attitude, we can talk about culture and all that sort of stuff. But I think on the defense specifically for last year, the big issue that I saw was just a lack of physicality and a lack of ability and a lack of numbers up front. They're starting to fix that. Whether they've completely fixed it, I think, is an open question. And I think we all think it's going to take a couple of years. But, I mean, you mentioned the defense. 2020, the defense gives up 370 points after giving up 201 the year before, 348 in 2021, and then 375 in 2022. So 3 straight years where they've been giving up over 30 points a game. You give up 30 points a game in the SEC, you're going to have some bad years, and that's what we've seen. They maybe got lucky given 370 in 2020 to be able to go 8-4 just because they had such a great offense with Kyle Trask and Pitts and Tony. But, you're not going to get that every year, and they're not going to get that this year, which means they got to be back in that 200 to 250 range in order to be effective this year, and we'll see whether they're able to do that.
Yeah. And that 2020 total was, not as many games.
11 games. Yeah. Well, I mean, it is 12, even though they didn't show up for the 12th game.
Right.
So.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I just wonder about the psyche. As you said, I think, as you said, just being deeper up front, and we'll get into that, as you said, and the names there. It starts up front, and look, that group can infuse a lot of confidence in this group. If that defensive line is dominating, hey, guess who's going to play better? Those linebackers and those defensive backs at the same time. It makes their job easier if those guys up front are. So maybe the psyche just goes away with a deeper front, and yeah, we'll get into that too in just a second. But plenty more from Austin Armstrong. But hey, here we go. Let's get to supporters of Gators Breakdown. Let's start with Caldera Lab. First impressions matter, and your face is likely the first thing someone notices about you. But well, let's put your best face forward with Caldera Lab. Clinically proven to reduce wrinkles, fine lines, and signs of aging, Caldera Lab is the leader in men's skincare, and you can use our exclusive code GATORS at calderalab.com to enjoy 20% off their best products. I just started using it on my daily routine to help with this hot Florida sun and sweat. And I was recently told, hey, man, you look good for 40. I just turned 40, but hey, I want to keep that going. So Caldera Lab creates high-performance men's skincare products, and the regimen is your twice-a-day formula to transform your skin. It's pretty easy. 30 seconds in the morning, 30 seconds at night. You'll see results in a week. Let's get to the products and begin with a clean slate that starts and ends your day. This face wash leaves all skin types refreshed. Then you'll apply the base layer right after that to moisturize and hydrate your skin. Even better, it absorbs fast, leaving you with a matte finish to start your day. And then the Good is your go-to at-night face serum to round it out. This clinically proven multifunctional serum helps your skin look tighter and smoother, getting rid of those wrinkles. And then let's take it a step further. The Icon. It's the eye serum that helps you shine while addressing the 3 most common skin concerns around your eyes: fine lines, dark circles, and puffiness. So don't wait. Get 20% off with our code GATORS at calderalab.com. That's 20% off at calderalab.com by using code GATORS. Support for Gators Breakdown is also brought to you by Manscaped, the best in men's below-the-waist grooming. Manscaped's Performance Package is the ultimate men's hygiene bundle. Join over 8 million men worldwide who trust Manscaped with this offer for Gator Nation. 20% off plus free worldwide shipping with the code GATORS20 at manscaped.com. Don't take a chance while trimming below the waist. Take care of yourself with the new Performance Package 4.0 that includes the new Lawnmower 4.0. This 4th-generation waterproof trimmer features a cutting-edge ceramic blade to reduce grooming accidents. Turn on the LED spotlight when needed for a more precise shave. Because this trimmer is waterproof, you can say goodbye to the mess on the bathroom floor. The Performance Package 4.0 also includes the Weed Whacker and the nose and ear trimmer. It's the best I've tried, pretty much the only one that works out there. And after trimming your football, show them some love with the Manscaped liquid formulations. The Crop Preserver Ball Deodorant, Crop Reviver Ball Toner are here to take your ball game to the next level. And then Manscaped even throws in 2 free gifts in the Performance Package 4.0, the Manscaped Boxers, and the Shed Travel Bag. Get 20% off plus free shipping with code GATORS20 at manscaped.com. That's 20% off plus free shipping with the code GATORS20 at manscaped.com. Let's get it going again with Austin Armstrong. And Will, of course, everybody wants to know, even dating back to Todd Grantham, dating back to Patrick Toney last year, what can the Gators do to get better on third down? That's just going to be the bugaboo of this defense. That's going to be the question that is asked until we actually see something done there, till we actually see it turn around. We talk about bad defense, and usually that is the first marker people will point to is third down defense. But he also goes into it, and he was asked about something the Gators did well last year, and that's creating turnovers.
Well, I think there's some layers to that, Edgar. I think one, the key to being good on third down is being good on first and second down. One of the hardest things to do in football for offenses is in known passing situations, which is usually like 3rd and 6 plus, to drop back, block people, and complete a pass. It really takes an offense, 11 people working on one accord to do that. It's pretty significant. And then defensively, you've got to create those situations on first and second down, whether you're in manageable situations of defense where you have the advantage. Calling defense now on 3rd and 4 is really, really hard, especially when you get to the plus side of the field where it's really like 2nd and 4 because the analytics, people go for it on 4th down, right? So we really spend a lot of time of being good on first and second down where we create opportunities on third down for us to be successful. And then with that, using the players that we have and their skill sets in which we believe we have some guys to affect the quarterback with pre-snap disguise, post-snap execution, and the ability to affect him that puts us in those favorable situations. Relative to that, we quality control everything. You know what I mean? We watch it, but I think a lot of it goes to, you got some unique players in this league as well on third down. You can rush and cover, but if you can't control the quarterback and the guy takes off scrambling, you got an issue, right? Well, you can blitz and pressure. Well, if you can't cover them or get to them, you got an issue, right? So I think we've really emphasized that, and then two, try to create a tremendous amount of urgency that it's a privilege to play on third down here. We don't get a participation trophy on third down. You know what I mean? We got to get 11 guys out there that can execute inside the framework of our scheme and have the right mindset of approach of that it's a privilege to be out there on it. Let's make it happen. Let's execute.
Well, Kevin Brockway, Gainesville, one of the strengths last year on defense was number of takeaways. How much do you see that trend continuing, and how much is that going to be emphasizing?
Yeah, you always emphasize it. I've been everywhere I've been, we've spent a tremendous amount of lip service and action relative to creating takeaways. And I've been places that we've been really good on defense and we ain't created any takeaways. I've been places that we have not been good on defense at times or not what we aspired to be and created a bunch of takeaways. There's a lot of layers to that. I think it starts with affecting the quarterback, exposing ball security of people on offense. You have to, emphasize that daily. Each time in practice, hey, it's great to show, in the unit meeting, hey, we forced a fumble here or we intercepted it, right? But was that a mistake by the offense or a good play by us? And there's times in which we don't knock the ball out or intercept the ball when there's an opportunity for us to expose the ball carrier. And by doing that daily in practice, that helps our entire team. You know what I mean? If the running back's here loose with the ball, we've got to expose that, because if we don't expose it, it's going to show up in the game. And we've got to, and then the urgency with it of when you get your hands on the ball, you've got to take it away. That's why it's a takeaway, not a turnover.
There you go. Austin Armstrong explaining third down defense and turnovers. And Will, one part before we get into all these stats, I'm glad he said stats don't tell the whole story, because, as he was basically saying, I've been a part of teams that have all these stats and it doesn't amount to anything, and vice versa. Look at Georgia. Georgia has, I won't necessarily say trouble getting to the quarterback, but Kirby has mentioned probably the last 2 years he'd love to get to the quarterback more. But they're not. Is it really affecting their defense? Not really. No, they're still the nation's best defense, but he'd like to have that bullet in the chamber. We go to our own defense. Will, 18 and 19, Florida's leading the country in sacks, or leading the SEC in sacks, getting sacks left and right, but couldn't get them in big games. Didn't really amount to, a great defense. You were just getting a lot of sacks. You couldn't really take advantage because third down was still an issue. But hey, those sack numbers were up, but hey, it wasn't correlating. So as Austin Armstrong says right there, stats don't tell the whole story there. So third down defense will. I'll go back to I still have it from when he was hired, and Austin Armstrong, and maybe why we should be a little optimistic that he can turn it around. But Will, you go back to a year ago, Florida ranked number 10 in the SEC in sacks with 23. Scoring defense was number 10 also, 28.8 points per game. Number 11 in passing defense, 236 yards a game basically. Number 12 in rushing defense, 175 yards a game. Number 12 in total defense, 411 yards a game. Number 13 in opponent first downs, basically 23 a game. And dead last in opponent third down conversion were the Florida Gators in the SEC last year. And it didn't matter. Todd Grantham wasn't on the sideline. It was still an issue under Patrick Toney. Of course, Austin Armstrong going to have to come in and really, really fix that issue as well. And why? Maybe. Can he do it? Well, if you go look at the improvement that he brought to Southern Miss as a defensive coordinator, 2020 was the last year without him. He comes in 2021, and you see improvement right away, right there on third down. 50% in 2020, his first year, all the way down to 39.6, about a 10% difference, and then even lower there in 2022. They were one of the worst defenses in the country, Southern Miss was, in 2020, in giving up third down. They were ranked 119th in the country. In 2021, they were ranked 69th, and then another raise in 2022 when Austin Armstrong was a defensive coordinator. So in a 2-year jump, all the way from 119th all the way up to 54th there on third down. But you see the improvement that he brought across the board right there at Southern Miss, getting better. Some of them were immediate. Some took a little bit longer as far as like points per game goes. yards per game where it was an improvement, but a dip in his last year there. Not a lot of talent there at Southern Miss. One reason, he was brought there, leaves, gets a promotion there to go to Alabama, ends up at Florida. But third down defense, you saw the immediate improvement that he brought in right there at Southern Miss.
Yeah, it's interesting you talked about like not looking at the stats. I think it's a question of, are you looking at the right stats? And the thing that I would say is that yes, Georgia, I actually had an article in our preseason magazine about this, which was, it's not necessarily to me that Georgia's getting to the quarterback. It's that they were the best team in the country or they were fourth overall yards per rush allowed, and they had a negative expected points added on rushing plays. And so when you hear Austin Armstrong say, look, you win third down on first down and second down, that's what Georgia was doing. Georgia was putting guys in 3rd and 12. And hey, maybe they're not getting to the quarterback, but how often do you convert 3rd and 12 even if you don't get to the quarterback? It's just not a proposition that you want to be in as an offense. And so the defense has a major advantage. And so this is why I go back to those guys up front, is that's where it all starts. If it's 2nd and 5 and then 3rd and 2, and that's what you're doing all year long, you're really going to struggle. And look, every once in a while you will give up a 3rd and 12. The question is, the 2 3rd and 12s you give up in a game, is that one of 7 3rd and 12s or is it the only 3rd and 12s and everything else is 3rd and 3? And he made a really interesting comment. I hadn't really thought about it this way, but the idea that you essentially have to scheme once you get to the plus side of the field, that 3rd and 3, 3rd and 4 is essentially 2nd and 3 or 2nd and 4, because analytics dictate that you're going to go for it on 4th down anyway. And we've seen that in terms of play calling, right? That guys will be more aggressive, that coaches are willing to take a deep shot on 3rd and 3 or 3rd and 4 when maybe they wouldn't have 10 or 15 years ago. And so it's completely changed the situation. And so when he's talking about winning on first down and second down, hey, that's important. Now, one thing that you did have in there is you had points per game allowed, and that didn't really move from 2020 to 2021 there at Southern Miss. The question that I have is going to be, obviously, when he comes into Southern Miss, there's turnover. There's guys you've got to get to buy into your program. There's all the culture stuff that we spent the first half of this episode talking about. Has he already gone through that? Is this essentially a second-year defense for Austin Armstrong, where Patrick Toney took the bullets last year?
Yeah.
And now Armstrong is going to be able to see that turnaround that you see from 2021 to 2022. Again, I think you look at 2021 to 2022, the big difference there was they started getting havoc. They were 4th in the NCAA in sacks, 3rd in tackles for loss, 7th in interceptions there in 2022. They were bad or middle of the road in those stats to start with. The one thing I think you need to watch out for, or at least maybe prepare yourself for, right? You were during the Napier section, you were talking about expectations. This defense is going to give up some big plays. Yeah. Like Austin Armstrong has given up big plays everywhere he's gone. It's one of the reasons why I was really, really not. I was pretty negative about this hire when he first came in, because I looked at it and I said, like sacks and tackles for loss, I think are the wrong stat to look for when you look at truly transcendent defenses. Like the Georgia defenses stop things on the run. They don't give up a ton of big plays, especially rushing. And Armstrong's defenses at Southern Miss have given up a bunch of running plays. They were 98th in 20-plus yard rushing plays in 2021 and 74th in 2022. And so you start looking at that and go, okay, well, does that really, how does that translate in terms of where Florida is? Now, Florida was 98th in 2021 and then 100th in 2022 in 20-plus yard rushing plays. So you're not talking about a defense that was any better at preventing those big plays. But I think that's the thing, right, is that if you're going to give up those big plays, you want it to be through the air. You want to limit things on the ground, and you want those 3rd and 7, 3rd and 8, 3rd and 9. And if you get enough of those, you're going to get off the field, even if you're not a transcendent defense. I think that's been the frustration. I mean, I saw in the comments there, somebody was like, it felt like we had 2 third down stops all year. And that's probably true. true because it always was 3rd and 2. And just the fact that it was always sitting in that situation meant the defense didn't have much of a shot. And then you have the couple during the game that get converted that are 3rd and long, and just you never get off the field. And that's been a constant now for 3 straight years, and it's going to be up to Armstrong to fix it. But again, I think it's worthwhile to set the expectations. This defense is still going to give up big plays. The way you want to measure it is not, did they just give up a 90-yard touchdown? The way you want to measure it is, have there been 7 3rd and longs in the first half today? And if that's the case and they've given up 14 points on 2 big shots, I think we got to live with that, because I think that's what this scheme and these players are probably going to get out of things, especially early on.
I'm glad you brought that up. Ocho Gringo on the Gators Breakdown Plus Discord brought up when Southern Miss played Tulane last year. We know how good Tulane was. I think Tulane jumped on like 14-0, like really, really quick, some big plays, and then pretty much shut them out the rest of the game. So maybe adjustments are a good thing for Austin Armstrong as well. We'd love to see some adjustments being made along with that. But also, with that maybe talent deficiency there at Southern Miss, maybe felt like he had to take more risk, and that led to some bigger plays. And maybe with a talent infusion at Florida, then maybe that comes down as well. But Will, I kind of agree with you. As aggressive as he is, there may be some of those big plays that are there. But if you're creating turnovers, if you are a clutch defense, and I think if you are better on 3rd down than what we have seen, then that can translate as well. As you say, giving up big plays is not a death sentence by any means, but where else can you make up for that at, I guess, would be my biggest question.
He's not BSing when he says he wants to hunt. Yeah. Like that has been his MO everywhere he's been. I have zero doubt that there are going to be times. I went back and looked for something. We're putting together a little postscript for the magazine, little update. I went back and looked at the defensive plays. It was a game that Southern Miss played. I think it might even been Louisiana, and every time it was 3rd down, the house was coming. There was never a point where I was like, oh, he sat back in a zone. Like, like they were coming. They were man to man. There was one, I think it was the first 3rd down of the game. They had cover 0. They just brought everybody and said, we're going to put our corners out on an island. That's going to happen this year. You're going to see, they're going to challenge Jason Marshall, and they're going to say, you got to make a stop. Like, we need you to high point the ball. You can't allow just a little pop up down the middle of the field to turn into a 50-yard gain. You're going to have to start making those plays, and they're going to challenge those corners to do that. Can those guys live up to it? I think that's going to be a big part of the story of the season. The other part is when you bring cover 0, you want to get to the quarterback. And so if that defensive line is getting a push up front, you can make quarterbacks really uncomfortable if you're getting push up front. So, look, I think there's going to be some times where Florida has the ability to do that just based on talent. I think they're going to be able to scheme some things open that allow them to get to the quarterback. I think, we do our over-under every year, and I think I'm going over sacks depending upon, especially if you set it based on last year's numbers. But
that's true.
But the reality is there are going to be some teams where they just can't get home. And when they can't get home, we're going to see some big plays, and we just need to be prepared for that. Again, I think the issue when people get mad is usually when their expectations don't meet reality. So if you expect this team to give up 4 points a game and never give up any big plays and be the Georgia defense that we've seen over the last, from 2 years ago, you're going to be disappointed. But if you expect a team that's going to give up some big plays, that they're going to leave some guys out on an island, and sometimes that's not going to work out, but you're going to start getting some explosive havoc plays in the backfield, then I think your expectations are in line with what Armstrong is going to want to do. And like I said, looking at the tape, the hunting, he's not just saying that. He's going to come after guys. 3rd down is going to be a blitz down. 3rd down is going to be a time where, the only time you're not blitzing is when you're trying to trick the quarterback into thinking that you are trying to get him to get rid of the ball early. You get somebody to drop into the zone, and you're hoping you get a pick 6. So, it sounds like they had a couple of those today. So hopefully those were some zone blitzes that Dijon was dropping into when he was picking off those pick 6s.
Yeah, I heard that too. Dijon Johnson with a couple pick 6s. Heard Jack Miller was the quarterback. Take that for what it's worth. We'll try and do some more digging there, but that was the name I heard. So we'll see if we can go from there. But yeah, well, I think if we use the spring game as a barometer, I think it gets kind of put out there. Maybe he blitzed a lot, but some of those, maybe even a lot of those were not blitzes. It was bringing 4 guys. You just didn't know which 4 were coming. He did a pretty good job at disguising, not calling out the dogs. Billy Napier did not in that spring game there. So, so a lot of it will look like blitzes as well, but it might all be coming from one side of the defensive line where, most of the 4 that are coming are all on that left side or all on that right side, kind of using numbers to their advantage on one side and see if we can get to the quarterback. But simulated pressures to creepers, I think we'll see a lot of that. And as Q says, no double cornerback blitzes. He does not want to see that. So yeah, hopefully we are done with seeing that or
we'll all lose it if we see that one.
Or safeties blitzing from Jacksonville. I don't think we need that either. So all right, let's keep it going with Austin Armstrong. One more sound bite from him, and it was on the missed tackles. Not just last year, but that's where the question went. But we know it's been an issue for there. How do you improve that in the offseason? And coming up here, where you only have 15 practices and very limited contact, is basically how do you fix tackling in just in the way college football is changing in the short time window?
I think the most underrated and unspoken part about defensive football, everybody wants to talk about scheme and doing this like that, is you got to get the guy to the ground. And, thankfully I work for a head coach that really understands that. And from starting in our off-season program in January, we work versions of tackling. Tackling is not just going out there and headbutting each other. It's the pursuit, it's angles, it's leverage, it's the relentless effort, how to finish, and then the technical aspect of finishing plays, right? And everything we do, regardless of we're in helmets, shells, pads, there's a specific tempo that we have to practice with. And even though we may not be tackling somebody to the ground, the pursuit, the leverage, right, the angles, and we spend a lot of time about that. And, at the end of the day, you got to be able to get the guy to the ground, and we try to be very specific about the situations that arise in games, and we spend time with our staff. Coach Bateman's kind of our tackling coordinator, and we watch a lot of film of the tackles that actually happen during the game. So we try to recreate that as much as possible. It's decision-making tackles. We talk about end of the down tackling when you're in short space, and you got to get the guy to the ground, and the different techniques that come with that. So we emphasize it to the fullest.
Emphasize it to the fullest, Will. And you brought it up earlier. I was going to bring it up here. We all go back to the last regular season game of last year, where tackling was just on full display and a sad display. I mean, we saw it. You could do everything right and not finish the play. Saw it too many times where plays are extended, should be simple gains or no gains at all that go for long yardage. And we've seen short yardage plays where an offensive playmaker breaks through a tackle, gets a first down, and as I said, lest we forget that debacle in Tallahassee last season where Gator defenders in the backfield on crucial downs, putting pressure on Florida State to, stay on field goal range or have to kick a long field goal. And Jordan Travis just somehow escapes a bajillion tackles and makes a play. And one's a touchdown and another one's in, goal
to fumble into the end zone.
Yeah. And this makes huge plays when all it was a simple tackle needed to be made. And Florida may win that game. Twice it happened. And Florida may walk out of Tallahassee with a win if they can make either one of those plays. They could make either one of them. So, it was the last regular season game where we just saw it on full display of just how bad, tackling has been for Florida. But it wasn't just, a problem last year. It's been an issue for Florida. And we could sit here and, hey, the game has changed and you don't have the time you used to. And, hey, all those other good defenses out there find a way to make it happen. We cannot use that excuse when somebody else out there is making it happen. I don't think they're going to be making any excuses in these next 4 or 5 weeks of fall camp.
Yeah, I think the important thing that I heard in all of that discussion is when he talked about leverage and angles. And you hear people talk about, and especially when you're listening to announcers, you hear them talk about contain, and they're talking about typically a quarterback getting outside of the contain and the defensive ends rushing so far up the field that he can either cut inside, or a defensive lineman or a defensive end sort of moving to the inside on like a stunt, and all of a sudden the outside is open, but basically not maintaining leverage there on the outside. And that's what you typically hear when you think about contain. But when I think about it last year for Florida, they lost contain downfield a lot. So it'd be something where like Hendon Hooker had a big run in the game against Florida I want to say it was a third or a fourth down, a crucial third or fourth down, where he ran for like 30 or 40 yards. And it was something where they had him stopped at, say, like the 7 or 8 yard mark. And the defensive back lost contain. So the defensive back went for the tackle instead of funneling him back to his teammates on the inside. And so, you go for the tackle and you get him down and everybody gives you high fives, but you didn't do what you're supposed to do, even if you get him down. And if he's mobile enough and he can make you miss, well, all of a sudden it turns into a 30-yard gain. And those are the things that I think of last year. There was a lot of stuff, especially in the defensive backfield with the linebackers as well, where you would have a guy not necessarily dead to rights like in the backfield. You'd have a guy 5, 6, 7 yards downfield. And yeah, it's a first down. And yeah, you're going to have a whole new set of downs. But to turn a 7-yard gain into a 40-yard gain because you didn't funnel the guy back to your teammates. Like, think about it. How often did we actually see Florida make a gang tackle where you had 5 or 6 guys come firing in to bring a guy down? I can't remember seeing that much at all. And I think a big part of the reason you didn't see that is you didn't have guys funneling the running back or the receiver or the quarterback, in Hooker's case, back towards the middle of the field where you could get some help. And so when he talks about angles and leverage, he's not just talking about getting to the hip and taking the guy down. He's talking about making sure that you incorporate your teammates into the tackling process. Because look, if you get 4 guys surrounding the runner, I mean, look, Kadarius Toney might be able to get through something like that, but most guys are going to just end up going down. And you can sort of corner them and get them to go down in a way where you don't necessarily have to make a great open field tackle. And look, every once in a while, you do need to make a great open field tackle, and somebody's going to have to step up and make those plays. But for the most part, if you're talking about an elite defense, yeah, you're going to have to make that play every once in a while. But if you're talking about just a defense that isn't putrid, then it's, did you do, and this goes back to the first part, did you do your job? Your job was not necessarily to get the guy to the ground. Your job was to make sure the team got the guy to the ground. Can you do that right? Not just one time. Can you do it right every time? And can you give up maybe a 3rd and 4 or a 3rd and 5, but it doesn't turn into a 30-yard gain because you did your job? And instead of them being on the plus side of the field now, they're still sitting at, say, the 35 or the 40-yard line on your side. And it gives you an opportunity. Like, that's where the stops come, right? If you give up 80 yards and the guy's in the red zone, it's really hard to stop them at that point. It's do you make them go 10 yards at a pop all the way down, just barely move the chains and have to do it again? And when you have an offense that does that moves down the field that way, they're going to make a mistake at some point. And when they make the mistake, you get off the field, maybe you force them to a field goal, maybe you force them to punt, and you've got the ball back. There just wasn't enough of that last year. There were too many 30-yard, 40-yard plays, and then the defense was already in a compromised situation, and they just didn't do their jobs.
Yeah, and then more on the kind of, I guess, single effort. The safeties had trouble breaking down tackles, breaking down players in front of them. I mean, too much lunging at ankles, too many lunge tackles. Not necessarily breaking down a tackle either. So going to your point too, I think the game tackling. I mean, also think about it, how many more turnovers you probably create in that situation when you get more players around the ball. Fumble happens. Okay, well, you got 5 guys who maybe picked that fumble up. So I think pursuit, getting more, as you said, hats around the ball. It was another aspect of that too. I didn't even think about the whole game tackling aspect. Now, I think I did think about that one time, maybe during the season last year, but something that's completely, with my mind that we did not see that a whole lot. So hopefully this, running to the ball, 11 guys all in pursuit. I mean, I think we go back to it a little. Not guys in spring. Kamari Wilson, I think the fumble that he created was not giving up on a play and everybody in pursuit and trying to make a play there. So we know the aspects that need to be improved. That's one of them. But I do like the one of not overlooking some game tackling there.
Yeah, well, I mean, you just look 2 years ago, the Florida Georgia game changed. The whole complexion changed when Georgia picked Anthony Richardson up off the ground and the ball pops out, and all of a sudden that entire game changes. And, that wasn't like, it wasn't like, oh, Georgia did a great job on that play. Richardson actually pushed forward for like 7 or 8 yards on that run. But the fact that they kept coming in and kept fighting and kept ripping at the ball, and all of a sudden the ball pops out, the whole complexion of that game changes. Now, obviously the 2 turnovers after that didn't exactly help things, but part of the the stone rolling down the hill there for Georgia was getting that first turnover because of gang tackling. And to me, again, it's indicative of everybody knew what their job was, and part of their job was get my hat to the ball the minute I know that guy's got it, and the minute we've got him contained. There was nowhere for Richardson to go once he decided to go up the middle, other than try to power through it. When he did, he coughed up the ball. So, those sorts of things happen when you put yourself in those situations, and that's the thing, right? Is that you want to if you put yourself in the right situation time after time after time, you will eventually see success. And it's that way with quarterback play. It's that way with defensive play. It's that way with any sport. Is that, look, there might be an opposing player who makes an unbelievable individual play, and all of a sudden you're left in the dust. But if you filtered him back to the right direction, then being left in the dust means he gains an extra 10 yards, not an extra 70. And those are the sorts of things that hopefully they'll be able to eliminate or at least minimize this year.
All right, we'll keep it going. Just because of time limit, I can't necessarily show it. But Austin Armstrong, I asked about players that stood out, and hey, he didn't want to single anybody out, Will. So he pretty much just goes through the whole defense for us out here. So, and going to one of the point you made earlier, and certainly one I wanted to get into, because you and you're dating back to spring when you and Nick were on here, and how, hey, Florida's much, much deeper up front. And Austin Armstrong really goes into that. And he goes, I didn't want to get into the individuals, but brought up defensive line. You have Desmond Watson, Cam Jackson, Caleb Banks, Chris McClellan, Tyreek Sapp, Jamari Lyons, and Will Norman, all battling to play and contribute, Armstrong said. You've got 7 guys in there to play 2 spots. We've got to figure out 4 or 5 that can do it for us. That is a good problem to have. I think we all feel good in some ways about Desmond Watson, about Cam Jackson, about Caleb Banks, Chris McClellan, Tyreek Sapp. I mean, that's just the names there. Jamari Lyons not well known, but he's going to throw his name into the mix. Will Norman, a highly rated freshman coming in as well. I mean, it is a good problem to have that Florida did not really get to have last year. Jervon Dexter playing out of position, playing too many snaps. That's not going to be an issue this year if all these guys can contribute. I mean, it's good that he's already bringing it up. Like, hey, these are the names I have. I have this arsenal right now. This is how deep I am up front. We're talking mainly, minus edge rushers, minus defensive end right there. But he does go on to say that. He goes, think about our edge category guys. Princely, Boone, Kelby Collins, Searcy, Cam James, Jack Pyburn, Quincy Ivory, the new transfer coming in. He says that position is very flexible because one of them is almost like a defensive lineman. And Will, I think if we break that down a little bit, we know Princely's going to be that edge. Boone's probably more of a defensive lineman type. Kelby Collins is probably more of a defensive lineman type. Searcy, the edge rush, Pyburn, an edge rush type. So they got some position versatility there where maybe you're strong side defensive end or weak side defensive end, and then your edge rusher. So as he says, one's like a defensive lineman, the other's like a linebacker. And then on third down, they're 2 totally different type of players. So you have an inside backer. He says it's a huge tactical position for his defense. Shamar, Scooby, Wingo, Taraja Mitchell, Manny Nunnery, Robinson, Spurlock, all those guys have done a good job, he says. And I like how he put that, Will. A huge tactical position is that inside linebacker. So really eager to see how he does that. But for that, because there's a lot of moving parts there. We use our linebackers very differently here. Sometimes we will play with a Mike, Will, and Sam. Sometimes we'll play just a Mike and a Will. Sometimes we'll play just a Mike. So there's a lot of layers to that. So some versatility there as far as linebackers go. And then he kept going to star, to nickel, pretty decent amount of time, he says, with Jadarius Perkins, Jay Hill, Sharif Denson, Bryce Thornton. Bryce Thornton getting some work at nickel. So that was a kind of a revelation that he may play there just a bit. He says a lot of position flexibility there. They've done a great job. And then back there, he says, keep going about safety. Kamari, Miguel, RJ Moten is a new addition for us. Jordan Castell had a great summer. Jamarcus, he said Bryce again for there. So maybe nickel safety for Bryce. And then Jamarcus Weston, of course, being moved to safety. And then he mentions corner, Marshall Moore, Kimber, Jakeem Jackson, D. Aaron Gates. And then so Aaron Gates kind of getting that corner label right there from Austin Armstrong. So maybe some wondered if he was going to be corner, if he was going to be safety. So a lot of players bought in. He says, I think our biggest thing is reaching each individual and their potential. Before we start categorizing people as leaders. I think that's a cool time about this time of year, but really pleased with the unit, he says. So I like how he dove in, Will, about the numbers at defensive line, maybe how they'll use the linebackers as well.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think defensive line, it needs to be Cam Jackson, Caleb Banks, Desmond Watson, and Chris McClellan with additions from the true freshmen. I think you can say the same thing about safety. I think you can say the same thing about corner. Linebacker, I think I'm pretty comfortable with Taraja Mitchell and Shamar James being the guys who are out there, with Nunnery being the athletic guy who sort of comes in, hopefully can go sideline to sideline. I feel comfortable with the linebacker, which is interesting because I haven't felt comfortable at Florida with Florida at the linebacker for a really long time. But Kamari Wilson, and Miguel Mitchell there at safety, those are two young kids who haven't played a ton there. And if you start getting into the Jamari Lyons and the Will Normans and the Kelby Collins and the Cam James for more than sort of 9, 10, 11 snaps a game, all of a sudden you're starting to rely on true freshmen in a way that I'm not sure you necessarily want to be relying on true freshmen in the SEC, especially early on, given what the schedule is going to be, starting off in that game at Utah. So getting a guy like Quincy Ivory in is a big deal, not just because you've got another guy on the defensive line, a guy who can hopefully put pressure and wreak some havoc, but because now you got a guy with some experience who can come in there. Caleb Banks doesn't have a lot of playing time, but certainly a lot of experience in college programs. I mean, we got to remember some of these guys, a lot of them came in the spring, but they're still adjusting to what it's like to be a college football player. Yeah. And it's look, we should expect contributions from true freshmen, like 1, 2, 3 guys. Like you think about Kamari Wilson contributed last year. You obviously have ETN who contributes last year. You've got Shamar James who contributes last year, but it's not like a lot. You didn't get 17 guys from that recruiting class contributing. If we're naming true freshmen at the end of the year in terms of their contributions, that may be good for the future growth of the program, but it's not good for 2023 because you don't want to be relying on those guys. So again, I think that's sort of the thing is he named off a lot of guys. There's a lot of freshmen, a lot of young guys he's naming off there, and hopefully some of the veterans can stave them off.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned safety. It looks like R.J. Moten, I think, may be supplanting Kamari Wilson. I think it might be a Moten-Mitchell safety backfield there for the Gators. Transfer from Michigan, a lot of snaps for a team that's reached the college football playoffs the last couple of years. Lost his job late last year, and there was some questioning whether they maybe saw him as more of a linebacker than that, but no, they've been impressed with him so far. He lined up first team there in the first practice today as well. If that means much to you this early on in the process. So there's your look at defense. As I said, that would kind of carry most of this episode. Austin Armstrong with a lot of good things to say, and I definitely wanted to get him there since we haven't really got to hear a whole lot from him, of course, being the new defensive coordinator there. So, all right, let's keep moving it forward. Before we wrap up here on this episode, we'll go to Rob Sell, co-OC there, along with Billy Napier, offensive line coach, and sounds off on a couple of guys that stood out from spring to now. So some good thoughts there. Slaughter, Najee Harris is what Rob Sell has to say.
Guys that really showed up, I would say Jake Slaughter, Najee Harris. There's some other guys, but those 2 guys off the top of my head really stand out, and guys that we know that we can count on, and I'm going to mix it up here in the next few days and can count on them to play good football for us.
Najee Harris is someone who's impressed you.
Yeah.
What has he been able to do just to get to that point?
Man, football comes easy to him. He looked like he's been around here 3 or 4 years, and he's a freshman. Everybody, it kind of hits him a little bit different times. Some need more reps. Some kind of get the concept, okay, I get it. But he's a guy that is a good teammate, good person, obviously a good player as well. So he's going to be a good player for a long time around here for us.
He played center in high school, but you guys have him kind of just a guard now?
He played both. He played all inside 3, constantly moved around. So I think that's easy for his transition and where he came from. Has pretty good coaching. So it makes it easy for him to be able to move around. Even though he hasn't played center and put the hand on the ball for us, he can go out there right now and play it, which it's hard to do. Special.
A lot of confidence in a true freshman right there, Will Najee Harris, and we saw him get playing time. Mazuka goes down in spring camp, and it's Najee Harris. I mean, he was turning heads before that, and then it was kind of probably just the way Rob Sale sounds right there. Okay, well, we know exactly who we're going to plug in right there behind Mazuka. Go get him some reps in spring camp, and I think it's odd to hear that about a true freshman. I think going back to spring so early in fall camp, right there at that position, because it's just so hard for true freshmen to come in at that position of offensive line and being able to contribute. But Rob Sale, it sounds like a lot of confidence there, because I think we bring it up just because we heard so much going back in the spring. It kind of matches what we were hearing behind the scenes, and also what Rob Sale is bringing up about Najee Harris. And hey, look, it's probably one more reason we want to get a lot of IMG guys, because it sounds like they're probably really well coached as well. That's a football factory there at the high school level, and they put football higher than a lot of other programs out there. So, I do think it's easy to see going back and dating back to spring why they're probably so excited for him.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think first off, good job by Sale there, making sure that IMG coaches like what he's selling. Hey, anytime you can flatter those guys, it's worth doing. The reality is you got Keontae Goodwin who's decided to transfer back, and certainly, best wishes to his mother. That's a
Absolutely.
more than a valid reason to transfer, but that does open up a hole, right? That opens up, are you going to have a tackle who moves into the inside? What are you going to do in order to fill that hole? And so one of the things that you may end up having to do is have a freshman come in and step up into that role. Every spot's open, right? I mean, the only one that's not open is Egwuken at center. And even that, I mean, he's singing Slaughter's praises. So he's trying to push Egwuken a little bit there.
Left tackle's not open either with Barber.
Yeah. Well, I mean, but again, I think that's not necessarily what they had to start the year last year, right? So you talk about continuity from the starters from last year. Egwuken is the only guy who's really the carryover. And so you got a lot of open spots. And, one of the things I'm sure that they've been selling these guys on when they've been recruiting them is you're going to get an opportunity to play right away, or at least you're going to get an opportunity to show that you can play right away. Mazuka is going to be limited in fall camp. Obviously had an injury in spring camp, some controversy about whether he's going to stay or not, limited in fall camp. There's an opportunity there, right? There are opportunities for guys to step up. And because they brought in a bunch of different guys from the transfer portal, and you've already lost one, but now you've got Lindell Hudson coming in as well at tackle. So look, the numbers are okay, they're not great, and so there is an opportunity, I think, for true freshmen to step in. I think, again, I mean, I made the statement that if you've got guys playing more than 10 or 12 snaps, that's more of a defensive line perspective. If you've got a guy who can go in there and play well on the offensive line, you don't really want to be jettisoning those guys in and out all the time. You want to find your five and ride with them. The question is, can they stay healthy all year? And is he big enough? That'd be my question for Najee Harris. Is he big enough, and is he strong enough to hold up over the entirety of an SEC season? He may know what he's supposed to do, and he may be functionally strong for a true freshman. But when you get in there in a stunt, you got Harold Perkins coming around on the inside in November when you're playing LSU. It's a different story than when you're in fall camp and you're completely healthy, right? Once you've had a running back come up on your ankle and you're hobbled a little bit and all that sort of stuff. So those are the things that I think you start to worry about with true freshmen, especially guys who are well coached. It's not necessarily are they going to be able to do what you've coached them to do. It's going to be, can they hold up over the strength of a full season? And Harris, in many ways, is a depth piece for having guys like Mazuka and Richie Leonard and George and Hudson and Barber and Egwuken out there. I think if you'd have come into the season after everybody transferred out with White and Tarquin transferring out, if you'd have told me that you could name 7 guys that you might feel comfortable with out there at offensive line, I would have said, ooh, they've done a pretty good job of refilling the room. So if Harris is the 6th or 7th guy, I think you're probably okay. If you're starting Harris, now I start to get a little bit worried in terms of just, you probably don't have that 6th or 7th guy. So it's not necessarily about the fact that Harris is in there starting. It's that what happens when a guy goes down. Do you have the depth to be able to fill the position? If you're starting a true freshman, that guy either needs to be really special, or it's indicative that the depth isn't where you want it to be.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we need Mazuka to be, the guy that we expected him to be when he transferred in from Baylor, and he needs to be starting there along that offensive five with Najee Harris maybe getting some reps along the way. Richard Leonard, another guard too. I think I think Florida, as you said, counting Mizuka in there, and left to right, Barber, Mizuka, Agweken. We'll see what happens there. Right guard, maybe Leonard, and then tackle. I think that's where we go next. That's probably still the biggest question mark, right tackle for this Gator team. Rob Sale goes into that as well with the loss of Keontae Goodwin in this tackle rotation.
We still got enough bullets in the chamber there when it comes to Damian George. You got Lindell, and you got Jordan Herman. So we got guys there that can play football for us.
What stood out to you about Lindell when you guys evaluated him and ultimately what led to you guys acquiring him?
You watch his tape, he has the movement skills that you're looking for, and then you got to trust your plan and your develop how you get guys caught up to speed there. That's our part, to get him to play that way. But you watch his tape, he's a guy that can change direction, long, hard to get around. So we're expecting good things from him.
Considering you graduated out of the program, how important was it maybe to add a guy of his experience, having been in the college game for so long?
Yeah, I mean, he's played snaps, and he has obviously haven't played in the SEC, but experience matters. Getting snaps underneath your belt, definitely.
Well, it makes me wonder what will win out. I mean, Damian George, I think, is probably the guy going through spring. He'll probably be the guy there at right tackle. As I said, Hudson brings in a ton of snaps from FIU for the last few years. But, George, his time at Alabama, played a handful of starts, played in a lot of games for the Crimson Tide, was mainly a backup, but got some high praise from Nick Saban at SEC Media Days, and I believe Cole Kubelik as well, maybe how he fits into this Florida offensive line. So I guess he's the guy at right tackle, but, man, I mean, it's just kind of weird Hudson transfers in with that many snaps and he's not a starter. I mean, it's just, maybe he just saw it as an opportunity to go to a big-time program. He was previously committed to USF before flipping his transfer commitment to Florida. Maybe he just saw that opening there, and maybe even more of an opening now, of course, with Goodwin on the way out. But it maybe opens up the door for a pretty good battle this fall between George and Hudson, and that should really just benefit Florida with that a battle there at right tackle.
Well, I was going to say it's not as though fall camp's over, so
yeah.
So I'm sure he didn't come in with where they were like, oh, you'll be a backup. You'll be the backup. Go ahead and come on in. It was like, no, there's going to be an open competition. The other thing is, again, I mean, he mentioned Jordan Herman.
Yeah.
Interestingly, a tackle, he didn't mention the freshman. So no Christian Williams, who's a redshirt freshman, no Caleb Jones, who was sort of a National Signing Day signee there in this class. So, whereas he's pumping up Najee Harris at the guard spot, it makes sense when you start looking at the depth chart because there's nobody in that sort of that sophomore space with Cam Waits out with the injury. But you start looking at tackle, and George, Herman, Barber, and Hudson are the four that he mentions. I think what will end up happening is that whoever ends up losing out will be sort of the rotation tackle, right? That if something were to happen to Barber, and let's say George is the third tackle, well, he's going to have to sub in for Barber. If something happens to Hudson and George is the backup, then he's going to have to sub in for Hudson. And you're sort of going to have to cross-train that guy to go to left and right tackle. I don't know that you're necessarily going to say, well, George, you'll be the right tackle backup, and Herman, you'll be the left tackle backup. I don't think that's probably the way it'll go.
I don't think they have that luxury, Will, honestly. I mean, you're right. They have to cross-train.
Yeah, well, and this is where, the last few years, Florida's actually been very fortunate in terms of offensive line injuries. They've had a couple of guys get nicked up, but nothing where they missed major playing time other than Tarquin being out last year and Barber stepping in. Now, I do think that Barber stepping in does give you some confidence that if there's an injury, the guy behind him is going to be ready. And that hasn't always been the case at Florida, but with the two offensive line coaches, with Napier being the offensive coordinator, that does give you more individual time with these guys. Look, there's no doubt that Goodwin leaving is a problem from a depth perspective. I'm sure they've invested time and energy and effort getting him ready to go. And, you're not going to have that guy there. But it's sort of the same thing as Waits. You bring him in from Louisiana and you expect him to be a big part of what's going on. And all of a sudden, he tears an Achilles. Now, it does sound like he's going to be back at some point during the season. So, again, if he recovers well.
He was out there working out today, too, by the way. So he's out there with the team and doing some
Yeah.
things.
So at some point this year, we may see Cam Waits out there too, and that's sort of a depth piece depending upon how good he is. Now, obviously, the only time we've seen him in a game, he was a guard. He was playing right guard in that game against Oregon State. So, where exactly he fits in this entire scheme, I don't necessarily know. But look, there's no doubt that there's stuff they have to figure out. And Hudson is a part of that. And like you said, I don't think he comes in with I don't think they promise anybody anything.
Right.
But I think other than a competition. And so, he has an opportunity to compete. And let's be honest, if you're Hudson and you've been at a mid-tier program and you're not getting drafted in the NFL based on your performance at that program, well, where do you go? Do you go to a place where you have the opportunity to play definitively, or do you go to a place where you show you can play in the SEC and all of a sudden now you're a surefire NFL draft pick? I think, that calculus has to be made as well. I mean, that is the benefit of being able to point to Osiris Torrance from last year and saying, look, this guy was perceived as one of the best players in the country, but everybody knew he was one of the best players in the country after last year. And you can sell that as far as transfer offensive linemen. So you bring in Hudson, you bring him into an open competition. I think George obviously has the leg up because he's been there since the spring and made a decision to commit to this team early. And continuity on the offensive line is a major deal. And so having that continuity helps. At the same time, somebody's gonna get nicked up at some point throughout the year. So whether it's Hudson playing with George backing him up or George playing with Hudson backing him up, one of those guys is getting in the game and going to have to play significant minutes, and we'll see if they're ready to go.
All right, we'll go to a little bit of center talk as well. And he was asked, what do you expect from Kingsley to take that next step? And Sales says, second year in the system. You got a lot on your plate when it comes to the center position. And, Mike Declaration is calling the front. We got a lot of motion, boxes, changes. He'll be nothing but better, just no different than any other position. The more you stack those reps with all the different variables that come at the position, you have no choice but to get better. There's technique things, obviously, we'll talk about as our evaluation on the player that he has to clean up and move forward to get where he wants to get. He's done a good job. He's conscious of the thing he needs to get, that he needs to get to the tape that he wants to play out there. So, yeah. And then he was asked about Roderick Kearney playing center in the spring game. Does he stay there or play guard? How do you view him moving forward? And Rob Sale says, no, he's going to be center for us. I know he had a few snaps there in the spring game, but he had a cast on his wrist. Give him a yard pass on that. He's going to be a great player, does everything the right way. He's tough, comes from a great family, which now he's a product of the way he was raised. But he's going to be a great center for us. I have no worries about that at all. So high praise there for another freshman on this offensive line. And Roderick Kearney, did struggle in the spring game, of course, but he's right down the road from me right here in Orange Park. He's more of a guard. I didn't know if he was going to play center or not. He gets to Gainesville. They lay him up at center in the spring. We saw the struggles, but maybe Rob Sale explains why that happened just a bit there for Roderick Kearney. New position, learning to snap, a cast on his wrist at the same time. So maybe you can see why he struggled there just a bit. But yeah, even last week I put that freshman series up from Florida Victorious, and you can hear from Roderick Kearney too, and definitely got a good head on his shoulders there. So no worries at all from Rob Sale as far as Roderick Kearney goes at center. So he feels pretty confident there, Will, for him, a second-year player in Kingsley Aguacan, and then a young Roderick Kearney behind him.
Yeah, well, I mean, so Aguacan is not just a second-year player; he's a fourth-year player, right? It's the second year in this system.
Yeah, so it's the second year for him.
Yeah, but I think that's a big thing, right? You think about the growing pains that Florida had a couple years ago, where they were at Kentucky and just had false start after false start after false start. Like that's partly, some of those were definitely on Aguacan, and so he's not going to be intimidated going into Utah, and he's probably the one that I look at and say, he's the guy that you just want to make sure doesn't get nicked up throughout the season, because he's going to be the quarterback of that offensive line. And while you're going to have moving parts around him, he's going to be the one who hopefully can bring a calming influence to that game, to that particular unit. If you end up having to put Rod Kearney in there, I mean, look, Sale is being generous, saying that there were a couple of bad snaps in the spring game. It was a pretty consistent theme that the snaps were not great. And again, true freshman, spring game, all that sort of stuff, not necessarily faulting him, but I think you can look back at that Kentucky game a couple of years ago with Egwekin and say those growing pains should pay dividends this year. I think if you've got Kearney in there, you're going to have to go through some of those growing pains that we went through with Egwekin a couple of years ago. And so he's the one I point at and go, man, I just don't want him to get nicked up. Like, I think it's important to be able to keep him healthy for most of the year. And, if they decide to give Kearney a bunch of snaps in some of those cupcake games, game 2 and game 4 there, I will not be upset because I want to make sure Egwekin is healthy when they're playing Tennessee and Kentucky and Georgia and LSU.
Absolutely there. So, all right, offensive line talk right there from Rob Sale, kind of going through that position group, and we'll see. We'll see what it means. There's some good pieces. They need to find some answers on that right side, and we'll see what they do for some depth. But maybe some true freshmen being counted on in those depth spots right here for the Gators offensive line. So, all right, quick notes from the first practice today. Of course, helmets only. You had some first timers out there today, guys that were not part of this team in the spring. Wide receiver Eugene Wilson he's one guy we're pointing to come in and maybe be a playmaker for this offense, and dealing with a hamstring injury is what it sounds like. Eugene Wilson kind of limited today in practice off to the side of the side field doing his thing there. So unfortunate. Hopefully he's back on the field soon and he can put together that display of talent we're just waiting to see at that wide receiver spot. Offensive tackle Caden Jones, his first practice again as well today. Defensive lineman Gavin Hill and cornerback Dijon Johnson, as we heard earlier, with 2 pick sixes in his very first Florida Gator fall camp practice right there with Dijon Johnson, to flip from Ohio State in last year's recruiting class. Then you had some transfers, of course, making their debuts for the Gators. Jacoby Jackson, a running back. Offensive lineman Lindell Hudson, of course, we just discussed him. Edge rusher Quincy Ivory, and then safety R.J. Moten together for the first time for this Gator team this fall camp. And then, of course, observe wearing black no-contact jerseys. Now, this is about the news we're going to get. The only open portion of practice. You can probably glean a little bit from what's happening there, but no-contact jerseys included Jonathan Odom, the tight end, Micah Mazuka. Did see those guys doing the team activities. Ty Bowman was in the black no contact. Eugene Wilson, as I said. Also, Cam Waits was working out by himself, as I said, as he tries to get back at some point this season. Mazuka was getting some first team reps, even though in no contact, and RJ Moten was with the first team defense back there at the safety spot. So there we go, Will. Little bit of football that we get to take away from some open portion of practice.
Well, fall lies, buddy. Fall lies. We'll see. We'll see what happens when everything's open. I mean, they're not going to show very much in this stuff, and that is one thing about the open practice that's coming up. I mean, they're going to show you what they want to show you in that one, and they should, right? I mean, we're getting close to a road game against a big time Power 5 opponent, and you gotta that's not an easy game. So you got to make sure you got every advantage you got when you're going out there. And there is
a little bit of element of surprise. So you're right. I mean, they probably shouldn't show much. Changing quarterbacks, you got a new defensive coordinator. You're not putting anything out there.
Yeah. So when Max Brown goes out to start against Utah, we'll be shocked and surprised, just like Utah will be.
Oh man. Will on fire. I'll put that on. I'll put that out on social media right there. That'll be the first one I'll put out on this episode.
Allegedly.
All right, back in the groove of things right here with Will. Will, you got stuff coming up with the fall camp?
Yeah, man. So,
like I said, baseball season's over for you. We're getting back here on the podcast. It's about time to get back in the groove on reading reaction as well.
Yeah, it is. We got obviously we're going to be doing Mondays for Gators Breakdown all season long. I'm about to put up a series or start a series. It's looking at for the preseason magazine that we had. Nick and I always pick the wins, the losses, and the toss-up games. So I'm going to be going through the schedule in the next couple of weeks, looking at all the toss-up games and saying what really sort of pushes that in Florida's favor, or why did I call it a toss-up game as opposed to being a win or a loss, that sort of thing. And then, once season starts, man, previews on Thursdays, recaps on Sunday mornings. And, there's usually, I try to have a post-game video right after the game over on the Patreon channel. So you can check that out over there too. So a lot of stuff going on, man, a lot of content. It's always fun once the bullets start flying and we get to experience some real football again.
Well, we're going to have to schedule this out when you take a look at the schedule, because it's something I want to do on Gators Breakdown as well in the next few weeks. There's opposing coaches' thoughts that I love, and then we talk about on Florida. I want to do that for the opponents as well coming up in the next few weeks. What do the coaches out there think about Florida's opponents as well out there? So I think we'll shed some light about what opposing coaches for the opponents think as well. I think that'd be pretty enlightening. So maybe we can, kind of partner up in that regard of what you did for your preseason magazine, what you're about to do for Read and Reaction, and we'll tie it in with the opposing coaches' thoughts from the coaches out there.
I can guarantee you they're higher on Joe Milton than I am.
Oh, little tease for you guys. Little tease. There we go. That's pretty good. Pretty good. We'll see. I know you were big on Hendon Hooker, and you call. I think he maybe even exceeded your expectations, but you were pretty high on him anyway. So
I was high on Hooker. I watched him at Virginia Tech. So
yeah.
I went to Florida, but I also went to Virginia Tech. Had family in Blacksburg. So when they were upset, like the family who grew up in Blacksburg were upset that Hooker left, I was like, all right, I got to take a closer look at this. And they went, oh crap, man, why'd he go to Tennessee? And sure enough, he played real well there. And a few years ago with Burrow, I was pretty on that one. There's some things you can look at, right? And the things that you tend to look at for quarterbacks, Milton is not somebody that I look at and go, yeah, I'm seeing some giant step up for him. So we'll see. I mean, there have been guys who've proven me wrong before, but I think it's always interesting when you see a team that's got fantastic quarterback play, what happens when that quarterback play sort of just recedes back to even normal. Like you think about Florida when Tebow left, and we all thought John Brantley was going to step in and be like a major player and a huge contributor to what Florida was going to be able to sustain. And Brantley was just not that guy, right? And Driscoll was supposed to be that guy, and he just wasn't that guy. And Treon was supposed to be that guy, and he wasn't that guy. And Greer was supposed to be that guy, and then he got popped for GNC. And there's just been this sort of parade of quarterbacks who come through. A lot of them very highly ranked, who just have not been able to work out for Florida. And then it turns out the best quarterback that we've had since Tebow is Kyle Trask, who was a two-star guy who always looked great in camp, but never got the trust of his coaches until Franks tore up his ankle, and all of a sudden he had got thrust in there. So it's not an exact science, and I'm interested to see what happens, because this really is a test for Heupel. I mean, Milton specifically is a test for Heupel. I think Hooker was somebody who sort of was able to leverage his skills in Heupel's offense. The question I have is Milton going to be able to do that? So I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be fun experiment.
Yeah, think so too. So, all right, there we go. Lots coming up. Fall camp should be getting a lot of pretty good player press conferences. Napier, of course, so we'll keep you up to date that way throughout fall camp. So, all right, that'll do it for this episode of Gators Breakdown. You can find Will on Twitter at Will Miles SEC. His site Read and Reaction. I am the host of Gators Breakdown, David Waters. You can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SEC. Guys and girls out there, thank you for joining us on this episode of Gators Breakdown.